Hi everyone, my name is Chris Bunio, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of TheoryMesh. TheoryMesh is a company focused on agriculture and food supply chain traceability. We use blockchain to make sure that we can manage data all through the food value chain. Today I'm going to talk about some of the best practices that we're seeing for managing sustainability using blockchain for agriculture and specifically with the impact on farmers. When we think about sustainability, I always go back to the UN sustainability goals. What you, I'm sure, are familiar with is these goals touch on a number of different areas, including environment, management, food production, and creating better equality across the different systems. I'll touch on a few of these today. I'm not going to go in extensive depth into everything, but you can see how using blockchain in agriculture can really help us to drive a lot of better outcomes for farms, farmers, and the communities that they live in. When we start taking a look at the farm and ask the questions around how do farms participate in sustainability, a few things pop to the surface right away. Beyond food production and that as the core capability of farms, some things that we see are that farms can actually help capture carbon and sequester carbon as we think about the environment and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Um, Farms today actually act as a source of an enormous amount of data about what's happening in the world and what's happening in the economy, and specifically, the data about food production. So understanding where food's being produced and how it's being produced. And all that data feeds into the supply chain. So if we look at any major food company who's trying to make sustainability claims, those things all start with the farm and what happens on the farm level. So we need to find ways to tie together those different pieces of what a farm does for sustainability and make sure that we can reward the farmers for their practices and also help them monetize any data that they may have. What we've seen over the last few years is really an explosion in the data for the food supply chain. So we've seen at the farm level, static information like seed data, land history data, more dynamic information coming from satellite imagery or smart tractors, all coming together to create that picture of what's happening on the farm. That all gets integrated with the information that's available at the food processor side. So for food processors, a lot of them use automated systems. We're seeing more IoT come into the environment to update and track information there. And ultimately, we know that consumers want to see more data about the food that they're eating. They want to know if it's organic, if it's sustainable, and they want to see some traceability. Once we start to build those data chains from the farm to the consumer, we can start looking at things like traceability across the entire system. And we can also look at other areas that are important like food safety, optimization, and improvement. What we're seeing today is that this is very difficult to do, primarily because the data systems and the supply chain is not connected. So we very much operate as a number of different silos when we look at food production. One of the big questions is always who has the data. So for many farms today, much of the data still exists in paper and spreadsheet. And this isn't a problem for traditional practices, but as we want to be able to start capturing that information, connecting to the supply chain, and in particular drive sustainability, it becomes challenging to do that if we don't have that data integrated. So we do see these as a lot of different information silos. And that even applies with some of the newer technology. So if we look at precision agriculture systems or farm management systems, often those systems as well, even though they're newer, maybe more modern technology, they still very much operate as data silos. So we'll see good detail on the farm, but that information doesn't flow through the rest of the supply chain. It also doesn't allow for the farmer to look at alternate ways to monetize some of that information. So these are all areas where we need to think about a little bit more of a different approach and start to look at how we can connect across these different types of systems. One of the first challenges for farmers is really digitizing and integrating their data. So as I mentioned, a lot of the data today lives in paper or spreadsheet form. So if we think just about land history, what's happened on a field, to really get an accurate picture, we need to go across what might exist as that paper record or spreadsheet record. We need to integrate satellite imagery so that we can see what actually has happened physically on that farm, and then we may need to integrate some of the machine data that's available to get a full record. So as we start to think about what this means for farmers, being able to digitize and store that information is critically important, and then being able to integrate it across the systems that they're using, again, is an important piece of this picture. This type of information then has multiple uses. So if we think about land information, it can be used for everything from validating history of a product for a certification. It can be used to validate practice for sustainability, particularly specific types of practices that help to retain carbon in the soil. And it can be used for things like land ownership or land valuation, where we actually understand what types of crops were grown on that land. So being able to have that information available creates new opportunities to potentially monetize it for farmers. When we think of blockchain in the agriculture space, this is a typical kind of scenario that comes up. So we have a crop that gets harvested. We can have a smart contract created with details around that crop. So that might contain the type of crop, the variety, details on when it's harvested and where it came from. That can then be connected up through transportation information, which may be updated in that smart contract. The grain is potentially stored somewhere, again, transported, and then goes into food processing. And what you can see in this example is this is sort of creating the example of using a smart contract as a way to capture the different data from the farm and through the transportation process. But really, this process starts with having the data available at the farm level. So in order to really make this an effective type of blockchain implementation, we need to be able to see that information right from the beginning. And in this case, if that crop was grown in a way that's carbon neutral, carbon negative, has other good characteristics to it, that might be important as we sort of see this flow going through. One of the things that I've kind of illustrated in this example is CO2 emissions that may be measured as we go through this process. So if we start with a set of data that tells us that crop is grown sustainably, we've got some carbon sequestration that's been done early in that process to be able to help and create a better carbon profile off the crop, that might have knock-on effects all the way through the implementation here. So we may see that carbon footprint of the crop being low actually allows for carbon credits to flow through to the different participants in the rest of the value chain here. So we may see that carbon practice offsetting some of the carbon tax that might be in play as we look at transportation or other things. And as we sort of think about this going through and reaching the consumer, in a lot of cases, consumers are being more conscious of both the greenhouse gas footprint, but then also the types of practices that have been used to prepare their food. So for one example, we see food allergies on the rise, so having that detail going all the way back to the farm can help us create the right kind of profile to be able to have certified allergy-free products. But we really do need that detail to be able to get back to the farm in order to be able to share that. So what happens when we start thinking about how that data gets to the blockchain and then gets packaged up into various forms? In most cases, starting on the farm level, we've got to start with the tools that are available to farmers today. So thinking about the record keeping and the production data capture. In many cases today, as I mentioned, that data is still available on paper or in spreadsheet form. So we have to look at the way that we can bring that into a digital system so that can then be integrated. There are a lot of different tools to do this. So for what we do at TheoryMesh, we provide applications that allow for capturing that data either directly or digitizing paper documents or Excel spreadsheets. But there are a number of different tools available to be able to capture that, everything from farm management tools to specific apps that look at the way that they can track carbon. But the key thing going past that production data is being able to actually integrate that, validate it, and certify it to then be able to create different products on the end side of that. So if you think about the production of food, we have a similar sort of production model here when we talk about getting this information to blockchain. So that record keeping and production data capture that happens at the farm side captures the raw material that's then used to build up a record or a smart contract that represents what that data is. And as we go through the supply chain, we want to be able to integrate those different data sources. Now, in this process, there has to be somebody who actually goes through and validates and certifies information if we want to use that farm data in, for example, a carbon credit. So that farm data is a great source of information to be able to talk about the practices and maybe the key things that are being done to reduce carbon emissions on the farm. In order to get a farmer to have a benefit from that, so thinking about monetizing that, we need to work with the certifier to turn that data into effectively a carbon credit. The same thing happens from a product certification standpoint. So if a farmer is using organic practices and has all of the pieces in place to look at producing organic food, they can go through a certification process to be able to hit that product certification level, which then again allows them to sell their product potentially at a higher price. And then the other piece that we're seeing is going through that type of a blockchain environment allows for that kind of consumer interaction with label claims. And this is becoming a big focus area for major food companies, where they're trying to differentiate themselves by having things like sustainable food label claims on their packaging. So consumers can choose something that's a more sustainable product. So to get there, we need to be able to have that data captured from the farm level, have all those different data sources integrated to be able to go into that kind of validation and certification process. And then ultimately, those can land in different types of smart contracts on blockchain, thinking about carbon credits, certification information, or consumer interactions that actually end up on either a private or public blockchain to be able to then attach value to those. Some of the ways that we're seeing this happen in the short term, on the carbon credit side, we're seeing different activity in different countries to be able to actually start creating a carbon market built around blockchain-based information from farmers. So we are already seeing the potential application of blockchain there for farmers that can capture their data and have it certified to generate those carbon credits. Another way that we see this coming through is as food companies are looking to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions, or as we see things like the EU with their supplier sustainability requirements, that traceability and transparency is needed for those companies to actually be able to give their own product certifications. And that's going to require the implementation of something like blockchain in order to be able to do that. So if we think about what this is going to enable for farmers, using blockchain as a way to capture the data and kind of put it into that kind of smart contract form creates an opportunity for different supply chain collaborations. So it does create the opportunity to monetize the data and the product in different ways. Those claims and credentials around sustainability, traceability, organics do have value. Those products are typically sold at higher prices. So there's certainly an opportunity for that type of information to be able to flow through. On the sustainability side, having that history of production and processing gives the transparency that's needed for a lot of the sustainability claims to be able to take place. We're going to see an increased focus on this. I'm certain that companies are going to be paying more for products that have got full history and transparency, and blockchain is exactly the right technology to be able to do that. And starting from today, farmers can start integrating their data there. One of the most exciting things for what we're working on is really looking at new business scenarios and payment mechanisms. So ways to use smart contracts that are payable to have consumers be able to tip directly to farmers. Looking at ways that NFTs can be made out of these data sets so that we can actually create new business scenarios where there's a different monetization channel or options for those types of products. And then that starts to flow right across the supply chain. So we can see, a scenario where farmers are producing a particular crop, and then they have an NFT that actually represents the data for that crop at the same time, and we can see them monetizing both of those things together as they look at the supply chain. So we can see a lot of different ways that that's going to come together in the future once blockchain is widely adopted in agriculture and food supply chains. That's just a quick kind of run through of some of the things that we've seen from the blockchain and sustainability space. And for follow-up or any questions, feel free to reach out to me at cbunio@theorymesh.com. Thanks a lot.